Welcome to the video. In this video we'll be taking a look at another indoor quadcopter. Now this is the one we're going to play with here. So far we've looked at a couple already. We looked at the QX90. This is the one where we actually added lots of guards onto the props so that if you hit things it bounced off. This one was great because it had kind of an F3 based flight controller linked to a Taranis radio. Then we had a look at another one as well. This was a little H36 or an E010 quadcopter that we added a little camera onto the top of, so it became a little FPV ship as well. Problem with this was you have to use a little transmitter. So this one is kind of like the best of both worlds in that it is a little FPV quad. It has that kind of enclosed structure and it also binds with the Taranis. So for those of us that already have that Taranis radio, this is something that we can play around with indoors in the winter months out of the cold, unless you're in the southern hemisphere, in which case you'll be out enjoying yourself with real quads in nice sunny days. So first of all, let me say a very big thank you to Banggood. That's where this one came from. Currently on their site for about $60, so relatively inexpensive. The specs on this, it's a 105mm quad. The flight controller is a NASE32 style clone. And if we go back to the desk for a second, hopefully you can see that the way it works is that the actual control board and the arms are all one piece, which could be a little bit worrying. If you hit something or stepped on it, if you broke an arm, then you'd have to get a complete replacement part. Luckily, on the Banggood website, the replacement parts are available. These motors here aren't the 8mm that things like the QX90 that we've looked at. They're a little bit smaller. These are the 7016. It doesn't come with a battery, which is a little bit disappointing. We'll talk about what comes in the box in a minute, but everything you see here it comes with and it's pretty much ready to fly. Doesn't have any kind of circular polarized antenna, just has this little whippy number, and this is a kind of a pretend X series FR Sky receiver here at the bottom that everything connects to. So it's a really cute, neat little model, and it weighs practically nothing. It's also got a 600 TVL line camera. I had to adjust the focus of mine quite a lot when I first plugged it in. You just turn the outside of the camera to get the focus spot on. Mine was very close up, so I couldn't see anything in the distance, but just by turning that was fine. The controls are on the back for you to select which channel that you want. There is instructions available on the website as well, so the setup was pretty straightforward, and I'll talk about setting it up with the radio in a second. But first of all, let me show you what else you get in the box. The box it comes in kind of looks like that. So very simple and basic, and when you open it up there's two great whacking bits of foam and the model is kind of nestled in the middle with the antennas curled up. The only other thing that you get in here is this. And at first I thought, what in earth is that? Now this is actually the thing that you plug into the USB port on your computer, and the other side then plugs in to the side of the model, and that allows you then to connect it up and have a look on things like clean flight. Now I found this very useful just to make sure that I'd bound the Taranis and everything was working properly, because you still set this up as though it was a full-size quad just to make sure all the radio settings are okay. Now I'll show you what the clean flight settings were in a second. The only other thing I'll mention before we do that is underneath it has a lot of room for a battery. I've actually been using it with one of these. This is actually a 3.7 volt 600 milliamp hour battery. This one actually came with the QX90, but it is an absolutely perfect size to fit underneath. Probably a little bit bigger than it should be using, but it gives you a slightly longer kind of 7-8 minute flight time with this. So let's go into the computer very quickly and I'll show you what we actually found when we plugged this little guy in, powered up Clean Flight and had a look at what all the settings were. So in Clean Flight the first thing we spotted was that it is actually Clean Flight version 1.12.1. We went into the command line interface and typed version, and there it is. It's a Clean Flight NASE32 image version 1.12.1, so that's what it's actually running with. So it appears and behaves just like a proper NASE32. So going back to the top, just having a quick look at each of the main configuration tab, having a look in the ports. There's only 2 ports on here, which is pretty standard for an FPV. The first one is UART1, which is running MSP. That's what that little USB cable plugs into, so we can talk to it. UART2, interestingly, is configured for serial receiver, which probably means this is going to be S-Bus. If we jump onto the configuration tab and scroll all the way down, then absolutely, there you see on the left hand side, the receiver serial is selected and S-Bus is highlighted as well. So this little receiver is working with S-Bus, which is great. The PIDs that we're using here are absolutely stock and standard and default. We haven't done anything at all. And the last thing I'll mention here is the modes by default was set so that pretty much everything is going to be flying in angle mode. Now I changed that very slightly so that it was angle at the low position, horizon in the middle and rate at the top. I'll probably never get to fly in rate mode, but it does give me the option. But that's how it's configured by default. To connect the radio to the model is really straightforward. What you have to do is you have to press and hold this little button here on the top. It's actually the one that's part of the radio receiver itself. It's easy to get confused on this, and I did for a little while. There are actually 2 little press buttons, and this one here that we're pointing to is the one you need to press as you plug the battery in. That'll put it into bind mode. Select D8 on your radio and put the radio into bind, and then everything should work. You'll know it's worked because the green light on the receiver will go solid. Do use clean flight to just make sure that the throttle and everything is moving properly. Middle values settle at 1500 and the travel doesn't go above 2000 or below 1000. Once you've done that, then you're pretty much ready to fly. So in the end, I actually had to swap out the battery. So this is the one that I originally tried to use. This was the one from our QX90. It's about 15 grams and it was just way too heavy. This thing was really struggling to stay in the air, where what we end up doing was one of these, which is a little 350 milliamp hour that fits in the bottom as well, and this gave a much better flight performance. Still fits in the bottom beautifully, and we were good to go. Now there's a couple of challenges that we've had with this. The first of all is that the camera doesn't tilt back very far at all really, and in a crash it very easily kind of pops out of the holder here, and you tend to have to go and find the little screw that's holding it on. There's a very small amount of tilt, but for anything but just pootling around, it isn't quite enough. That's a little bit disappointing. The other thing that we found as well is that although it flies fine, we're not getting a lot of flight time out of that smaller battery. So we're only getting about 3 or 4 minutes, which isn't great. And although the video quality on the camera is absolutely fine, we are also getting problems with drift. So the way it works is when you power it on, the red LEDs come on at the front, the blue LEDs at the back flash briefly. When you arm it, those blue LEDs come on, and then you're good to go. We've plugged it back into the computer and tried everything to get rid of the drift using our getting rid of drift video, and even though we've gone through that and calibrated the accelerometers, we still seem to have this real problem drifting one way or the other. And the only thing I can think that is it's something to do with the implementation of the FPV on this model. Now that does make it a little bit more challenging to fly. For those of us that have got a couple of years under their belt, then what you tend to find is that you're naturally correcting for that drift anyway. But for a new pilot, that would probably make this really tricky. Now I don't know if we've got one here that is an exception or whether this is the rule, but I would say if you're looking at this as a very first quad, then do be aware of that, and just remember, because it doesn't come with a battery, if you're going to order one, make sure that you're ordering something like the 350 milliamp hour pack. That for us seemed to give us the best compromise in terms of the performance of the model, but unfortunately I just wanted that little bit longer flight time. Thank you for taking the time to watch that video. There are lots of other videos on the channel and they're carefully ordered into playlists, so you may find that there are other videos on this same subject that you can go and watch. So I would recommend going into the playlist area of Painless 360 YouTube channel and looking around and seeing what there is. You never know what you might find. Thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe, and happy flying.